to get online earlier, but I got invited to an open mic on short notice. So I played an open mic today instead of doing the live stream, which I meant to do, but oh well. I was gonna do a short bedtime story even though it's really late, just because, I don't know, it's been a good day and I'm all energized and I don't feel like going to bed yet, so let me find a short one. Let's do harem fantasy. Vertigo turns an old dream upside down. So okay, this is out of the section of the book called Wet Work, which is like such a gross subtitle that I just love it. Okay. Harem fantasy. Vertigo turns an old dream upside down. The headlands of Santa Cruz Island, a wall of dark, crumbling rock, the kind climbers call vertical mud, rose a sheer 800 feet out of the Pacific Ocean. Pelicans soared against the face of the cliff, drifting by. Where does it say? Pelicans soared against the face of the cliff, drifting by on a current of air. Our boat was anchored in a rocky cove. Just under the shadow of the cliff, pillars of jagged rock rose out of the tranquil sea, and there were several small beds of kelp a short swim from the boat. The pelicans, with their long beaks and pouched, oddly shaped necks, looked vaguely reptilian in flight. Miniature versions of the Japanese movie monster Rodan, that boxcar-sized Tokyo-stomping pterodactyl. Off on a rocky beach, not far from the boat, a large group of sea lions discussed our arrival. Ark, 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 they said. There were several hundred of the beasts sunbathing on the rocks. The animals were dark brown, almost black when wet, but on the beach they took on the color of the sun. The 8-foot-long males can weigh up to 600 pounds. The females, a couple of feet shorter, seldom weigh more than 200 pounds. The males fight among themselves to establish harems of up to 20 females. Unlike true seals, sea lions can rotate their rear flippers, and they moved from the beach to the rocks with an endearing, awkward waddle. Humans seem to find this mode of locomotion cute, in the same way they consider penguins cute. Most of the trained seals you see on television or in the circus, the guys who honk bicycle horns for fish, are actually California sea lions. Out in the dark water, near the kelp beds, a few of the sea lions lay on their backs, floating there in lazy immobility like vacationers in the Great Salt Lake. Their flippers, which projected out of the water, looked like the fins of small sharks, makos perhaps, or blues. I dropped into the water and swam for the nearest kelp bed. I was wearing scuba gear and a black hooded wetsuit, and I expected to pry a few scallops off the rocks for dinner. Sea lions can be playful diving companions, but they are thieves as well. So awkward on land, they can swoop and dive like pelicans in the water, and they can make off with a goodie bag full of abalone or speared fish in a manner that makes a diver feel furiously helpless. Like an elderly and arthritic woman victimized by a purse snatcher on a city street. It is therefore prudent, when diving in the presence of sea lions, or in waters where there may be sharks, to tie the nylon mesh or goodie bag to your weight belt with a long rope, secured by a slip knot, an offering to these fat lords of the Channel Islands. If you have no choice but to cooperate, better to do it on your terms. I reached the kelp bed and dropped beneath the entangling mass of green blades on the surface. This particular variety of seaweed attaches itself to a rock on the ocean floor. A kind of air bladder forms on the upper leaves, allowing them to float to the surface. Diving in a kelp bed is like walking through a triple canopy jungle or a redwood forest. Sunlight filters through the thick upper vegetation in the pure shafts that ought to be accompanied by an angelic chorus. The beds are full of life. A cold water current rushing down from the Arctic runs out of power here off Southern California, and the sea life is an amalgam of cold and warm water organisms. Little animals hide in the depths of the kelp, pursued by hungry, larger life forms that in turn are careful not to stray too far toward the edge of the bed where the really big predators lurk. I was twisting through long stems of kelp, thinking of scallops sauteed in butter and garlic, but the bed was small, and I decided to swim to another larger stand that was closer to shore and the sea lion colony. Larger stand that was closer to shore. Oh, larger stand that was closer to shore and the sea lion colony. It was there, just out of sight of both beds, in the open sea, with the sandy floor opening up like a desert on all sides. Then the vertigo hit me. Divers and pilots, even experienced ones, suffer from complete disorientation on rare occasions. It happens to pilots in no visibility situations, on instruments, when they suddenly realize they no longer know up from down. The same thing can happen to divers moving through open water, where there are no points of reference. There is some sense of dizziness and nausea, compounded by irrational thoughts and confusion. Though, I found myself thinking about sea lions, about the things that Karen Strauss, who has spent years living in the Channel Islands, told me before this trip. Is it safe to dive with the sea lions? I had asked. Oh, sure, she said. It's fun. Any danger? Not from the females, generally. If the males think you're another male, there could be trouble. It's rare. What do they do? They beat you up. Oh. Of course, since you're not nearly large enough to look like a male, it's more likely they'd think you were a female. I was thinking about this because at 6 feet and 200 pounds, I was about the size of your basic female sea lion. The black wetsuit looked like the slick and shining skin of a wet seal. Vertigo presented me with the unsettling thought that a powerful 600-pound beast could just possibly fall in love with me here in 80 feet of water. What happens if he thinks you're a female? I had asked. Well, he'll try to separate you from your diving partners, try to drive you out to open sea. Okay, but once he gets you where he wants you, I wasn't sure I wanted to know this. What does he do? He beats you up, she said. Do I look like a female sea lion? What if one of the big fellows decided I was some desirable exotic, a worthy addition to his harem? It was not a salubrious image. A life spent on the beach, wallowing around fatly with the other females, knowing the shame of being the ugliest wife, the sad, slow one who keeps getting her scallops snatched away, the outcast with the far-off, wistful look in her eye. Imagine lying there on the rocks, trying to chat with the other wives, those complacent lard buckets, secure in their own blubbery allure. Looks like we're in for a storm. Ark, ark, ark. And every once in a while, every month or so, a freighter would steam by a few miles off the coast, and there I'd be, standing in the wet sand, waving my arms, screaming for help, a damsel in distress, an innocent imprisoned in the chic seraglio. Help me, for the love of God, they think I'm a female sea lion, and the big guy wants more kids. No answer from the ship, but here comes the male, this 600-pound tyrant, huge, dominant, terrifying. He's sliding rapidly over the beach, using his flippers and leaving a furrow in the sand the size of an irrigation ditch. The big guy is moving fast now, not nearly as cute as he might in the circus. And instead of honking a bicycle horn, he is growling deep in his throat, making the message abundantly clear. Sit down and shut up. He glances around at the other wives as if to say, yeah, she's ugly, but you gotta admit, she sure smells different. A chorus of sarcastic laughter here. Ark, ark, ark. And then I was moving into the second kelp bed, and the vertigo dropped away from me like a rock kicked over the lip of the Grand Canyon. The relief was primal, instinctive, back to the trees and safety. What the hell? Trapped in some blubbery harem? What had been going on through my mind? Could such a thing really happen? Or was it the fact that I'd just seen Tootsie? At the far reaches of my vision, in the open waters, beyond the kelp, a sea lion began slicing through the gray waters in my direction. It looped toward the surface, and the tangle of vegetation there then dived straight down, disappearing into the cathedral of light in the depths of the kelp. I couldn't tell if it was a male or a female. What did you think, you guys? I enjoy that story a lot. It's pretty funny. I had a really good day today. I had a lot of fun. So I got invited to this open mic in Pacific Beach, and it was a little weird. It was like a lot of white people playing white people music, but there's this there's this other woman there. There's one other woman who plays music, but she was cool, and her name is Katie S. And she plays ukulele, and so I played my songs, promoted my show that I have tomorrow, and I actually sold another ticket to my show tomorrow, so that's cool. And then skedaddled back to the trolley station, and then I got a lift for the last leg of my trip home. Like from the trolley station, I usually get a lift because it's hard to get a bus back. And then my driver happened to be like really into Iranian music and then gave me a whole bunch of suggestions of like santoor players I could listen to. It was really cool. So um yeah, and then I checked out some of it. It was like really beautiful. It's like a traditional like rural Iranian instrument, like kind of like a dulcimer. So that was really cool. And that was my day. Yeah. And I gotta get up tomorrow and play a show. But let's see. Should I read one more story? That was my day. Did anyone else have a cool day? Did something happen? I'll look for another story while I wait for your answer. And then, okay, the other cool thing. After he wrote out a list of santoor players that I should listen to, I was like, hey, there's this rock band I know that plays a bunch of Hungarian music, and they're called Red Fiction. And I put it on for him, and he was like, whoa, I love this. And it was cool. He's like an older Iranian man, and he thinks this rock band that I love is cool. Um, and like, anyway, it was cool. It was a cool exchange I did not expect to have. Very energizing. Normally I'm exhausted, but I had an energizing day. So that was cool. Let's see if I can find another short story. Have I read Love and Death in Gorilla Country? I might. Let me see if I read that one yet. Oh, that's a 30-page story. I don't think I'm going to read that one. Let me see. Yeah, I can talk to you guys, but I just kind of told about my day, and I was gonna read another story. Why go live if you don't want to read messages? I do. Usually when I'm reading a story, I don't check on messages, but if you guys had something cool that happened in your day, I would love to hear about it. Let's see. I'm gonna read what people said. I feel like you guys are talking to each other more than me. Someone said I look like a person who plays a ukulele. I briefly did get a ukulele when I was in Hawaii, but my ukulele stayed in Hawaii. God, my lighting is really bad today. Rough. Not the most flattering. What can we do about that? I don't know. Someone is like, is she reading a poem when I'm over here with the most poetic messages? Okay, I'm gonna read another story. You guys can chime in with anything interesting that happened to you today if you want. I might do In Deep 7 Good Reasons Why You Too Should Consider a Scuba Escape. Sounds pretty good. Okay. In Deep. Diving doesn't upset your stomach, as aspirin often can. I got firmly and incurably hooked on diving several years ago when I was doing the pool work necessary to become a certified diver. It was early one Monday morning. The day before, I had attended a wedding where I was forced, very nearly against my will, to drink massive quantities of champagne for hours upon hours without surcease. I woke up that Monday in my own bed, but I was still wearing the rental tux, and the overhead light burned like an ugly accusation. My tongue was made of sandpaper. I felt diseased. That very day, I had an appointment to go lie in 10 feet of water at the bottom of a pool in the scuba school. I would be down there for about an hour. The exercise was designed to help a student become familiar with the sensation of being underwater for long periods of time, and to help him learn proper use of the scuba gear. I pulled on the wetsuit and put on a 15-pound weight belt, which weighed somewhere in excess of 200 pounds, and then fell into the pool, the tank on my back, the regulator in my mouth. At 10 feet, I took the regulator out of my mouth and blew a little of the pressurized air I had been breathing into the vest-like piece of equipment known as a buoyancy compensator, or BC. That was the extent of the exercise. Put enough air into the BC so that its lift precisely equaled the downward drag of the weight belt. I lay 1.5 feet off the bottom of the pool. I lay down in the foot of the pool, comatose, like a man in a sensory deprivation chamber. Each time I took a breath, I'd rise a few inches. Each time I exhaled, I'd sink a like amount. I was neutrally buoyant, completely free of the gravity that had seemed a cruel and unreasonable force only an hour before. The silence sang, and the moral aspects of my condition began to recede. I wasn't really such a bad guy, and it probably wouldn't cost all that much to get the tux cleaned and mended. The pain in my joints, which had made my arms and legs feel the way trees growing at the edge of the tundra look, had begun to subside. Each time I exhaled, another portion of my pain arose inside the bubbles and burst on the surface of the world, leaving me feeling stronger, healthier, and more morally staunch. And so it came to me, as I lay on the bottom of the pool, exhaling ailments, that scuba diving cures hangovers, and I was hooked. Anand Ravindran said, I saw this on Instagram. Where? Where did you see this on Instagram? Okay. We can learn from the wacky antics of our underwater friends and even apply these lessons to our everyday life. A single example should suffice. In tropical waters, especially around coral reefs, one often sees small blue and black or yellow and black fish known as wrasses. They usually hover close to coral heads and escape into small niches. Species of wrasse, however, stay well away from any protection. out in the open water in what is called a cleaner station. These cleaner wrasses twitch about in such a way that their colors catch the sun and attract the very fish that habitually eat most wrasses. I butchered your name. I'm really sorry. You can put a pronunciation guide if you want. Okay, the predator in question may be a 2 foot long ground grouper. It attaches to the cleaner wrasse and opens its mouth wide. The wrasse swims directly into the grouper's open mouth, an apparent suicide, but there it eats the tropical parasites that accumulate and annoy the grouper. This is an example of a good business deal. The wrasse gets a meal, the grouper gets rid of its parasites. Symbiosis, mutual advantage. In these same waters, there is another fish that looks very much like the upright and businesslike cleaner wrasse. The blenny, however, is an entirely different type of fish. The sly blenny finds a wrasse in full dance at its cleaner station, and there it sets itself up for wicked business by imitating the dance of the honest fish. When the grouper approaches, mouth open, the blenny darts in, tears off a hunk of flesh, and escapes to a nearby niche the enraged grouper can't penetrate. The blenny is a fish that lives in treachery and feeds off the flesh of those who would freely feed it. It is sometimes called a false cleaner, though I prefer to think of it as a lawyer fish. Anand says, "Hi, I'm Bob the other fish. You're the blenny? You're gonna sneak off pieces of flesh out of people's mouths?" Okay. Diving makes you feel so good you could just die. Rapture of the deep is a wonderfully poetic name for nitrogen narcosis, an intoxication produced by breathing nitrogen gas under pressure. The only time I've been noticeably narked was in the Blue Hole, a 400-foot deep pit off the coast of Belize, formerly British Honduras. The hole is set in shallow water, about an hour by light plane from the coast, and it contains structures that help prove a long-held scientific theory. It is thought that during the ice ages, so much water was concentrated in the form of ice at the polar caps that the seas of the world were actually shallower by some 400 feet. To see the structures that support that theory, I was going to have to dive deeper than the maximum safe sport diving depth of 130 feet. There are several dangers involved in exceeding recommended depths, and to understand them, you have to know a bit about gas laws. The air in your tank is just ordinary air, but it is packed in there somewhere between 2,000 and 3,000 pounds per square inch. The genius of the regulator is that it feeds air into your mouth at ambient pressure. If the water is pressing on you at 5 times the surface pressure, then you are getting air that is 5 times as dense as surface air. You need this pressurized air. Your body is mostly water, and for diving purposes, it's best to think of it as a sealed plastic sack full of water. The lungs are 2 air-filled balloons inside that sack. The deeper you dive, the more pressure on the sack, and the more the balloons want to collapse. Breathing ordinary air at 100 feet would be as difficult as trying to suck air into your lungs from the surface with a narrow straw. At 100 feet, a diver is breathing air that is 4 times as dense as sea level air. Each breath contains 4 times the normal component of nitrogen. Nitrogen is pretty much inert and is passed into the tissue and fluids of the body without being utilized. The fatty tissues of the brain and nervous system, however, seem most susceptible to nitrogen absorption. All this excess nitrogen banging around in your brain can make you perilously goofy. Divers use martinis as a rough measure of narcosis. Each 33 feet of depth makes you feel as lightheaded as one martini on an empty stomach. To see for myself the reason that the blue hole is an object of scientific study, I was going to have to go about 200 feet, or a little more than 6 martinis worth. At that depth, some divers have felt a euphoria so intense they've given their regulator to a fish and died laughing. The hole is shaped like an hourglass, and I sank past its high waist at about 90 feet. The wall sloped inward, then, forming a ceiling over me. At 130 feet, I saw the first structure. It was a stalactite, hanging from the roof of the wall. There were others, deeper down, 12 to 15 of them. They were huge, 25 to 30 feet long, and there was no oceanic explanation for them. Stalactites can only grow in terrestrial caves. which means the blue hole must have been a dry cave or sinkhole during that shallow water times of the ice ages. I remember floating upside down, looking at the stalactites, pleasantly aware of a growing euphoric narcosis. The stalactites pointed down, deeper down, and they were of a shape I remember from church. They looked like statues of the Virgin in her robes. The sound of my exhalations was symphonic, and the virgins hung there, pointing into the darkness far below. Inexplicably, I thought of Atlantis. If the legendary island had been an oasis of culture and knowledge during the ice ages, then the flood that destroyed it must surely have come when the polar caps released their water. The thought seemed monumental, earth-shaking, historic in import. Bubbles rose up my body and rolled up a virgin's robe, so that in one small corner of my mind I knew I was still upside down, and I was shining a light on the end of a stalactite, and there were crimson blotches, like carnations, where the face of the Virgin should have been. She was pointing down into the darkness, and oh, I wanted to dive deeper, even deeper. My buddies, professionals all, and I ascended, according to a plan, and we hung off the anchor line for 25 minutes. Hanging off, or decompressing, is not nearly as much fun as reading Silas Marner. The purpose of hanging there at 200 feet for all that time with nothing to do or see is to let all that excess nitrogen bleed out of your system. Remember, the nitrogen was absorbed underwater, or under pressure. If you shot straight to the surface from 100 feet, all these nitrogen bubbles in your brain and nervous system would expand to 4 times their size, and you'd spend the rest of your life in a wheelchair explaining to people why they call it the bends. So I hung there, bleeding nitrogen, and no longer narked in the least. Atlantis seemed a long way off. Unimportant now, compared to the realization that the blue hole had acted like a psychological siphon, had tried to pull me down into its darkest depths. Another 50 feet, and I never would have stopped diving. I would have died happy in the warm womb of the hanging virgins. Diving is a sport for the lazy. There are sets of tables that tell you how deep you can go and how long you can stay. And if you follow the table, you will never have to decompress. Safety in diving is largely a matter of celebration or cerebration. Plan your dive and dive your plan. Here's the plan for my most recent dive. A guide and I anchored over a reef just opposite Rum Point, or the north side of Grand Cayman, an island about 150 miles northwest of Jamaica. Toward the shore, reef drops off to a shallow floor, which slopes up to the shores of the island. The outer section of the reef fronts the Cayman Trench, which at its maximum depth is a little more than 4.7 miles deep. We're talking abysmal depth here. The outer section of the reef forms a vertical wall, a wall that seems to drop off forever. We were anchored over the reef proper, about 40 feet below us. On top of the reef was a small opening. Long tunnel runs down on slant. It is about 60 feet long altogether, and empties out on the wall at a depth of about 90 feet. Checking the tables, we found we could stay at 90 feet for 30 minutes without decompressing. Call it 25 minutes just to be safe. A very gentle current was sweeping to the west along the wall, so we'd swim east for the first half of the dive, then turn around and let the current float back to us on the boat. We decided to hang off for 5 minutes at 10 feet, for no reason other than it made us both feel smart. We dropped over the side and entered the tunnel, which was so narrow we had to go single file. The oval passageway was dark and so smoothly sculpted with strange and grotesque shapes that it seemed to have been purposely crafted, but by forces unseen and inhuman. We dropped over the side and entered the tunnel, which was so narrow we had to go single file. The oval passageway was dark and so smoothly sculpted with... Oh, I just read that. Sorry. At 90 feet, the tunnel spit us out into the brilliance beyond the wall. The sensation there, with the wall dropping away forever into the abyss, was precisely that of dream flight. There was a euphoria there, too. The emotion I feel in my dream state when I realize how silly I've been all these years for not using my powers of flight. All this was touched by the sweetest tinge of purple narcosis. Visibility, I swear it, ranged to 150 feet, And off to my left, the open water was deep blue, like the Montana sky on the clearest of days. I looked to the wall. Every niche and ledge was overlaid with bizarre and unearthly shapes. Purple pagodas from some alternate universe, barrel sponges a man could stand in, sea fans bluer than a baby's eyes, and all about, swimming purposefully, like citizens of a busy city, were hundreds upon hundreds of fish. The regal Moorish idols, angelfish, long-nosed buttery fish, sad-eyed squirrelfish, blue and black wrasses. Every minute or so I'd check my watch and pressure gauge and depth gauge. After 15 minutes of deep diving along the wall, we rose to the top of the reef, 40 feet or so, and let the current urge us back toward the boat. No reason to swim if the ocean will do it for you. The top of the reef was choked with color, like an alpine meadow in spring. Blue and green and black and yellow crinoids, fern-like invertebrates that feel like Velcro to the touch, were interspersed with all manner of soft corals. There were green and gold and purple red sea fans. There were flowering corals and long golden sea whips swaying in the gentle surge. We rose to examine a spire that jutted steeple-like from the top of the reef. Near the top of the spire, and nicely centered in it, was a particularly baroque niche or window. Set deep back into the middle of the niche was a flattish green barrel sponge, like a child's chair. To the right stood a long purple tube sponge that looked like the kind of floor lamp a colorblind person might buy at Woolworth's. To the left of the little green chair was a small white octagonal sea fan, which looked like a doily set against the gold-flecked bit of green-red sheet coral that formed the wall of the niche. All in all, it looked like a tiny room built by an aquatic hobbit with a psychedelic habit. We rose to the anchor line and hung off on the rope. The most physically demanding part of the dive had been the 2 minutes it took us to don our equipment. There is no record of any diver being eaten by a giant squid, like the one that got Captain Nemo's sub in that movie. The diving industry blames the movie Jaws for a perceptible dip in sales, and I'm sure they'd like me to point out that not all sharks are particularly scary. In Australia, the small epaulette shark tries frantically to escape divers and snorkelers. The little fellow feels safely hidden if he can get his head into a coral niche, no matter that his body is completely visible. The epaulette shark, this ostrich of the sea, can't see you, and he lies still as a stone, thinking he is a very clever fish. Incidentally, the epaulette shark has no teeth. He is affectionately referred to as a gummy. The carpet shark is a sedentary fish, and he is often seen loafing on a circular plate of coral. His coloration is intense, in a mottled, ancient sort of way. He looks like the most ornate carpet in Grandma's house. A little fringe of beard, like white lace coral, hangs from his chin, making him look like an elderly dandy. The carpet shark simply sits and waits, snapping up the occasional unwary parrotfish. Once at Heron Island on Australia's Great Barrier Reef, I watched as a woman, posing for a picture, sat on a carpet shark's head. The shark bucked in an irritable manner, and the woman came off her perch like someone shot from a cannon. The carpet shark glared up at the divers with its widely spaced milky white eyes. I thought of a grouchy old man forced to dress as a teenager. Reef sharks, such as the black tip, are considered harmless animals. I've seen them 5 and 6 feet long, and I've swum with them on patrol. They are beautiful, in the manner of a samurai sword. Form follows function, and they make good diving buddies if you can keep up with them. There are sleeping sharks off the Caribbean coast of Mexico, sharks so docile that divers have been known to pull their tails. Caribbean nurse sharks are large enough to generate a full-scale adrenaline rush, and they are the ones local divers look for when they want to watch sharks. In Cozumel, Mexico's premier dive resort, I talked to a woman named Rita Chess, who sometimes works as a shark handler for feature films. She told me about her work on a film called The Zombie 2. The zombie, an underwater sort in this trasher, likes to grab topless female divers. These are rare off Mexico, but the zombie perseveres. In the end, the zombie is carried off by a shark, and the Caribbean is again safe for starlets. The zombie stood on the ocean floor in his weighted boots. Rita and her team of 3 stood out just out of camera range to the left. Another team of 3 stood to the right. Rita's team pushed the shark out toward the zombie and in front of the camera. It drifted lazily by the guy in the rubber mask, indolent and indifferent. The second team caught the shark. They turned it around and ping-ponged it back to Rita's team. They did this dozens of times, while the zombie waved its arms and spouted great gouts of artificial blood. The film would be cut in such a way that sales of diving equipment would be sure to suffer. Experienced divers often choose a dive site where they know they will see sharks. They want to see sharks. Some diving guidebooks specifically specify areas where sharks are usually present. Here's Nancy Sefton in Dive Cayman, Shark Alley, a moderate depth site, noted for the frequent sighting of reef sharks. Chances of seeing sharks are fairly good. In Cayman waters, these have proven to be harmless creatures, even shy. I do not mean to suggest all sharks are shy or harmless. There are more than 200 species of sharks extant, and some, hammerheads, great whites, tigers, grays, can be dangerous. But even if you do come upon one of these bad guys, your chances are something on the order of 500,000 to 1 against being attacked. Knowledgeable divers consider such sightings a privilege. Ulysses said, I had a dream about you last night. Oh no, I am so sorry. What did you dream about? Pretty sure I had a dream about my grandmother last night. Okay, guys. I should probably go soon. It's almost 1. I have a show tomorrow, but I'm gonna try to live stream on Saturday night. I don't think there's a show on Saturday. I'll see you guys later. It was good to see you guys tonight. I'll see you in a couple days.